Daniel Dubois opened up by explaining what had happened to him recently. He shared that he fell ill while in Riyadh, and despite wanting to fight, he listened to the advice of doctors, his father, and his team. They collectively decided to pull him out of a scheduled fight. Dubois admitted he was gutted about it, but he acknowledged that unfortunate things happen in life. Now, he insisted that he was back, ready, and eager to give fans the fights they were waiting for. He declared that he was willing to give everything he had left at this stage of his career, expressing his determination to become a two-time heavyweight champion. When asked about his relationship with Daniel Itama, Dubois responded with surprise, revealing that he had discovered a different side to him. He mentioned that Daniel was not how people imagined him to be, that in reality, he was not the same as the image many perceived. Dubois confessed that he himself was surprised by this realization. However, his remarks shifted tone when critics weighed in. Some voices harshly called Dubois a disgrace to boxing, questioning how and why he was given certain opportunities. They argued he had not beaten any notable opponents and pointed out that he tended to lose in major fights. These criticisms underline the skepticism surrounding Dubois and his current place in the heavyweight division. Attention then turned to his next potential steps. Dubois dropped hints about facing Moses Itama, but did so in a way that sounded less like confidence and more like an escape route. He hyped the idea of shock and surprise while simultaneously keeping his eyes on Joseph Parker, suggesting unfinished business with him. To many observers, this looked more like hesitation than hunger. Fans began to interpret his focus on Parker as a diversion, a way to avoid the immediate threat of Moses Itama. While Dubois tried to project confidence about returning to the ring and silencing doubts, the underlying narrative painted him as a man unsure of how to face the rising challenge directly ahead of him. As Dubois expressed his intent to fight anyone, he reiterated that after the Parker loss, some had accused him of ducking opponents. He pushed back against this, stating he just wanted to deck someone. But while he rattled off names in public, the impression grew that Moses Itama was being intentionally sidestepped. Moses himself gave his perspective, calmly exposing the contrast between Dubois's public bravado and what he saw in private. He suggested that in training and camp, Dubois did not look like the monster fans believed him to be. To Moses, Dubois appeared hesitant and meek, which highlighted the gap between his talk and his reality. For observers, this reinforced the perception that Dubois was avoiding the inevitable clash. Even Joseph Parker seemed unconvinced about Dubois facing Moses next. Parker explained that boxing politics often interfered, with many things happening behind the scenes that were not publicly visible. Still, his hesitant tone gave away doubt that Dubois would step up to fight the teenage rising star. Instead, Parker implied Dubois would probably pursue other routes, circling safer opponents rather than facing the challenge everyone wanted to see. Frank Warren then gave his view, trying to put Dubois's situation in perspective. He compared Dubois to Frank Bruno, reminding people that Bruno had lost several title fights before eventually becoming champion on his fourth attempt. Warren tried to argue that Dubois still had time, as he was only 27 and had already won a world title once. However, his tone was interpreted differently by fans. Rather than inspiring patience, it sounded like excuses. Supporters of Moses Itama viewed this as another attempt to buy Dubois more time and protect him from the young contender who was already knocking loudly on the door. Fans saw Warren's comments as further proof that the fight with Moses was not on the horizon and that Dubois was being steered carefully rather than being allowed to take on the most dangerous challenge available. Johnny Nelson gave a blunt breakdown of what separated real fighters from those who fell short. He described how elite fighters had to mentally isolate themselves, focus completely, and elevate themselves to another level of existence. Nelson stressed that a fighter had to rise above the noise and distractions, living on a higher plane where only the fight mattered. This, he suggested, was the difference between fighters like Moses Itama and those like Dubois. According to Nelson, Dubois was still caught up in excuses, external noise, and image management, while Moses was already living in the mental space of a true warrior. Fans began to agree with Nelson's analysis, recognizing Dubois not as the next big thing, but as someone drifting in a make-believe space, unable to confront the one opponent who could truly define his career. Carl Froch echoed similar sentiments, reflecting on the hurt business from the perspective of a man who had lived it. He described how stepping into the ring was not about protecting an image, but about preparing for survival, for war, and for putting everything on the line. Froch's perspective drew a stark contrast between Moses and Dubois. Moses appeared fearless, ready to risk everything for greatness, while Dubois seemed hesitant, more concerned with protecting his brand and circling safer names like Parker. Fox's words underlined how dangerous hesitation was in boxing, explaining that in this sport, hesitation meant defeat. His no-nonsense tone emphasized that Moses carried the mindset of a warrior, while Dubois carried the aura of self-preservation. Meanwhile, Frank Warren's insistence that Dubois would fight someone in the top 10 sounded more like a stalling tactic than genuine matchmaking. Fans interpreted it as a way to avoid Moses and set up another, easier fight to keep Dubois's career afloat. Warren attempted to frame it as strategic planning, but observers saw it as simple avoidance. The longer Dubois delayed facing Moses, the worse it looked for his credibility. Fans believed Moses was chasing greatness, while Dubois was circling the edges of risk. The more time passed, the more Dubois looked like the man unwilling to face the storm. Dave Allen did not mince words in his assessment of Dubois. He outright called him a quitter, going as far as to joke that Dubois was the chairman of the quit committee. This jab went viral and cemented a growing perception among fans that Dubois lacked the mentality for the brutal climb ahead. Allen pointed to the Usyk fight as an example, recalling how Dubois appeared fine walking past Usyk yet still bowed out. To critics, this was proof of a mental gap. Moses, by contrast, had shown no such cracks. He relished pressure, demanded the toughest fights, and thrived in the spotlight. Allen's criticism was more than just an insult. It became a viral humiliation that fed into a narrative of Dubois as fragile hype rather than a true contender. Shane Mosley attempted to defend Dubois, suggesting that Usyk's size, experience, and skills were simply too much for him. He praised Dubois's mindset and argued there was nothing more he could have done. While Mosley's words seemed supportive, many fans in the UK saw it as another layer of excuses. They noted that while Dubois's supporters kept rationalizing his setbacks, Moses Itama was calling out top names at just 19 years old, sparring with seasoned fighters, and showing no fear. To fans, Mosley's defense only highlighted the stark difference between the two men. Dubois was being spoken for, while Moses spoke and acted for himself. Dominic Ingle added his perspective with a vivid Viking analogy. He recalled how Vikings would dull their senses with alcohol before battle, but even then they fought with the knowledge that it was do or die. Ingle applied this lesson to boxing, stressing that only those truly prepared for battle survived. His words landed heavily on Dubois, who seemed stuck between posturing in public and actual preparation behind the scenes. Moses, on the other hand, was sharpening himself like a blade, embodying the true do-or-die mentality. Ingle's warning was clear. Either Dubois embraced the warrior mindset fully or risked becoming a cautionary tale. Taken together, these voices framed a picture of two very different fighters. On one side was Daniel Dubois, a man caught between his ambitions and the weight of expectations, surrounded by excuses, image management, and protective matchmaking. On the other was Moses Itama, a teenage prodigy with the hunger, mindset, and fearlessness of a seasoned veteran. While Dubois circled names like Joseph Parker and leaned on explanations for past failures, Moses pushed forward, seeking greatness without hesitation. The fight between the two was seen as more than just another clash in the heavyweight division. It was a test of courage, legacy, and truth. If Moses Itama won, he would establish himself as the new dominant force in British boxing, the standard bearer for fearlessness and ambition. If Dubois somehow managed to defeat him, he would revive his career, silence his critics, and prove that he was more than the fragile figure some had labeled him. But for now, the momentum, energy, and belief were firmly with Moses Itama. Fans looked to him as the future, while Dubois's credibility continued to erode the longer he avoided the fight. Observers across the UK saw Dubois not as the unstoppable force once promised, but as a man at risk of being remembered for blinking first. While Moses was already in fight mode, living and breathing the sport with no excuses, Dubois looked distracted by old grudges, public perception, and the shadow of past losses. As time went on, the contrast only sharpened. A teenage fighter preparing like a seasoned warrior, and a veteran acting like he still had time to hide. For many, the conclusion was becoming clear. In boxing, hesitation is fatal, and Moses Itama could smell the fear. He was ready to seize the moment, while Dubois continued to circle safe names, making the gap between the two impossible to ignore.